My name is Jordan McClain, and today I'm presenting a policy speech of the First Amendment right, freedom of speech. The United States Constitution First Amendment right to freedom of speech plays an important role in democracy, allowing citizens the freedom to speak freely, clarifies limitations and restrictions on people freedom, and provides citizens with understanding of freedom of speech as defined by the government. Have you ever said something to offend someone? Do you think it is okay to say whatever you choose to say? If you answer yes to my questions, then you may or may be protected under the First Amendment freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is a very controversial topic that still exists in the courts today. Knowing the legality of expressions can prevent us from violating the First Amendment of speaking freely. Through research, I will provide important facts on the freedom of expression and what is considered legal and justified in the eyes of the government. It is no secret that people say things to hurt others. It is also no secret that people do things to harm others. That is why the First Amendment was written to protect the rights of citizens and prohibit all citizens from any offensive and abusive language that is harmful and unpleasant to others. I will explain how the right of freedom of speech, an important amendment to the establishment of a democratic government, is granting citizens the right to express themselves with dignity and respect to others. I will begin my presentation by quoting the First Amendment of the United States. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution declares, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble in a petition of government for a redress of grievances. According to the National Constitution Center, the freedom of speech allows everyone to express their ideas and opinions verbally and in writing. American citizens can say whatever they choose to say about the government without fear of being prosecuted. However, the law declares abusive and offensive language to harm others are prohibited. One may ask, is this a violation of my freedom of speech? Although the government granted us this right to speak freely, it is our American duty to place values on our choice of words. According to the United States Constitution First Amendment, on the Britannica website, citizens cannot be prosecuted for expressing themselves freely. All citizens have the right to voice themselves peacefully in any way they choose. Congress can make no law that prohibits anyone from saying whatever they choose to say about the government. Citizens are protected for expressing their emotions and opinions in the press and communicating verbally, prohibiting any criminal and offensive behavior. Therefore, their actions and words are justified and do not violate the First Amendment. Citizens are protected by the First Amendment freedom of speech. According to the legislative attorney, Kathleen Ann Roan, there are still restrictions from the government concerning time, place, and manner. The government restrictions on time refers to a certain time of the day for someone to express themselves. For example, protesters are prohibited from causing traffic jams and crowd control to express their freedom of speech. The place restrictions allow citizens to express themselves in certain places. For example, the government is allowed to regulate non-public places restricting protesters and expressing themselves. Non-public places such as private property and publicly owned property allows the government to place speech restrictions relating to the type of functions being held. Limited public places such as the courthouses steps also allow citizens to express themselves under certain circumstances that the government allows. The manner restrictions focus on the mode of individual expression. For example, the government prohibits protesters from sleeping in certain national parks and to stand on symbolic expressions. The government also regulates and imposes restricting the size and or placement of signs on governmental property. The limitations and restrictions also impose limits on the noise level of speeches. According to the case Ward versus Rock against racism, New York City officials attempted to control noise levels in Nuremberg acoustic band shell. This is an amphitheater in Central Park where concerts are held in high sound amplitude. New York City officials adopted a regulation requiring musicians and performers to use sound amplification equipment. The Rock Against Racism band challenged the regulation, stating the cities were placing limitations on their freedom of speech. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that New York City officials could control the volume of amplified music and rock concerts in Central Park without violating the First Amendment. Although music is a form of protected expression, the city officials had the right to control the volume of the music. However, Judge Anthony M. Kennedy stated the sound amplification requirement was a time, place, and manner restriction of speech and opposed to the content control measure. Now, I would like to tell you about some of the limitations that are controversial to the meaning of freedom of speech. According to an article on the history website, freedom of speech is a democratic ideal that dates to ancient Greek. The article also mentions the United States placed limitations of the freedom of speech rights. Those statutes of limitations allow citizens to express themselves with symbolic speech. In the case Texas versus Johnson, Gregory Lee Johnson burned a flag outside of a convention center to protest policies during President Ronald Reagan's term in office. Right. Texas convicted Mr. Johnson, stating this was an act of anger and an attempt to incite anger in others. Mr. Johnson's conviction was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, ruling that his actions was a part of symbolic speech that is protected under the First Amendment freedom of speech. This became a very controversial issue to all courts and states. However, desecration of the U.S. flag can result in penalties or imprisonment due to American flag is a national symbol which is also protected under the Flag Protection Act of 1989. Although Congress passed this action into an amendment, the U.S. Supreme Court still ruled that this is a violation of the First Amendment and symbolic speech. However, the First Amendment allows citizens to express themselves without penalties. I would like to tell you which type of expressions that are not covered under the First Amendment freedom of speech. The misimpressions of the First Amendment freedom of speech right can get confusing and controversial. According to the Freedom Forum Institute, there are several types of speech that are not covered under the First Amendment. Perjury, blackmail, child pornography, and true threats are examples of protected speech. These types of speech can lead to criminal or civil restraints under governmental laws. Anyone who expresses themselves to cause harm and abuse to others also is not covered under the First Amendment. Therefore, inciting riots to bring evil and offensive behavior is an act of criminal conduct that creates danger to other citizens. According to Watts versus United States, an African-American male protester named Robert Watts attended an anti-war rally at a Washington monument. There were small discussions group held to focus on problems of police brutality. Mr. Watts allegedly stated, "They always holler at us to get education, and I have already received my draft classification as IA, and I have got to report my physical this Monday coming. I am not going. If they ever make me carry a rifle, the first man I want to get in my sight is LBJ. They are not going to make me kill my black brothers." Apparently, an armed counterintelligence corps investigator overheard the comments Mr. Watts expressed. Mr. Watts was arrested and convicted for a federal crime prohibiting threats. President Lyndon B. Johnson, a federal, convicted Watts of violating the statute, and the divided district of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed. During the appeal of the U.S. Supreme Court, reversed in a 5-4 optionated decision. The majority determined that the federal state prohibiting threats against the president was constitutional and that true threats receive no First Amendment protection. Mr. Watts' case is one that is important and continues to stand out today, as true threats is not protected under the First Amendment. In conclusion, during my speech I provided you with information on a controversial topic of what is considered freedom of speech. Now I will summarize the importance of speaking freely. After listening to my presentation, I can clearly state that everyone has the right to say whatever they choose to say. Although the First Amendment protects us of our word choices, it is our responsibility to support the government's legal sanctions on the First Amendment freedom of speech. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution declares, Congress shall make no law restricting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of people peacefully to assemble, and a petition to government for a redress of grievances. We are convened under the amendment to speak freely without the fear of being retaliation from the government. I want to direct everyone's attention on the direct controversial court cases pertaining to the First Amendment freedom of speech. Although states declare one's action and words unconstitutional, the United States Supreme Court rules that this is a violation of citizens' First Amendment. Therefore, we must understand the consequences the government allows on what is and is not considered freedom of speech.